40 years of putting your family first. And the one time you do something for yourself, they call it a problem. My name is George Bates. I'm 68 years old. I've lived in the same neighborhood for over 2 decades, in the same house on the same street, with the same woman I've loved for 40 years. For most of my life, I wasn't the kind of man people noticed. I got up before sunrise, worked long hours, paid my bills on time, saved more than I spent. While other people upgraded their lifestyles, I invested. While other people chased appearances, I planned for the future. Every raise, every bonus, every extra dollar I could spare found its way into an investment account. Not because I was rich, because I was disciplined. My wife Maggie used to joke that I could make $1 feel guilty for leaving my wallet. The truth is, I never minded spending money on the people I loved. I spent it on school tuition, family vacations, car repairs, unexpected emergencies, whatever my family needed. But spending money on myself, that always felt selfish. Until my 68th birthday. 3 days before that birthday, I walked into a BMW dealership and did something I'd never done before. I bought my dream car, a brand new BMW 7 Series, white exterior, black interior, every feature I'd admired for years whenever I secretly browsed car websites late at night. The price made me hesitate for exactly 10 seconds. Then I paid cash. The drive home felt surreal. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't get out immediately. I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, taking it all in. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I'd rewarded the one person who'd spent decades taking care of everyone else. Me. The feeling lasted exactly 4 days. That's when my daughter Chloe showed up. She wasn't expected. I happened to be standing in the kitchen when her car pulled into the driveway. She parked, then just sat there, not moving, not getting out, staring at the BMW. I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto the porch. "Morning, sweetheart." She slowly got out of her car. Her eyes never left mine. "Dad, whose car is that?" I smiled. "Mine." Her eyebrows shot up. "You bought that?" "Sure did." She walked around it once, twice, like she was inspecting evidence at a crime scene. Then came the question. "How much?" $85,000. The color drained from her face. She pulled out her phone before she even reached her car. I knew exactly who she was calling. My son Jake. The next morning they arrived together. That was never a good sign. When my children visit separately, they're just stopping by. When they show up united, they've already had a meeting, and usually I'm the agenda. We sat in the living room. Maggie lingered nearby, pretending to straighten things that didn't need straightening. Nobody spoke at first. Finally, Jake leaned forward. "Dad, we need to talk about the BMW." I nodded. "Go ahead." "It's irresponsible." I actually laughed. "Irresponsible." "Dad, you're retired." Chloe jumped in. $85,000 is a lot of money. I know, I counted it before I paid. Neither one smiled. Jake rubbed his forehead. "Dad, you need to start protecting your assets." There was something about the way he said assets that caught my attention. Not concern, calculation. I looked at Chloe. "What exactly are you worried about?" She hesitated, then said the quiet part out loud. "You're spending money that should be saved for the family." The family. Funny phrase, because sitting there listening to them, it suddenly felt like family didn't mean all of us. It meant them. If you've ever spent years sacrificing for people only to discover they expected it, subscribe. Because some lessons arrive later than they should. I kept my voice calm. "I hear what you're saying." Both of them visibly relaxed. They thought they'd won. They thought Dad understood. They thought the conversation was over. What they didn't know was that later that night, after everyone went to bed, I sat down in my office, opened my laptop, and started reviewing every dollar I'd quietly spent on their lives over the last 22 years. By midnight, I had a list. 41 recurring payments. And before I finally shut down the computer, I made a decision that was about to change everything. I didn't make a speech. I didn't send a group text. I didn't call a family meeting. The next morning, I simply started canceling payments, one by one, quietly, methodically, the same way I'd spent years setting them up. Some were small, streaming subscriptions, gym memberships, cloud storage plans. Others were much bigger. Insurance premiums, phone plans, rent assistance, vehicle expenses. Things my children had stopped noticing because they'd become part of the background of their lives. The first domino fell less than a week later. I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee when Jake called. "Dad, something's wrong." I smiled into my mug. "Morning, son." My car payment bounced. There it was. The beginning. Jake's Audi wasn't mine. His name was on the lease. But for years, the payment had quietly left my account every month. Until now. "I got a notice from the finance company," he continued. "Did something happen with the bank?" "Nope." A pause. Then another. "Dad, I'm cutting back, remember?" The silence that followed told me he finally understood. Not completely, but enough. I wished I could say I enjoyed it. The truth is, I felt something more complicated. Disappointment. Because a 34-year-old man should have known who was carrying his financial weight. Instead, he'd gotten comfortable. A few days later, Chloe's turn came. Her internet service stopped working. Then several subscriptions disappeared. Then a few other conveniences she'd never paid attention to suddenly vanished. She called Maggie first. Of course she did. My wife spent years protecting everyone from consequences, including me. That evening, Maggie sat across from me at the kitchen table. "George." I looked up. "Yes?" "Chloe's upset." I stirred my coffee. "I imagine she is." "She's struggling." I nodded. "That's the point." Maggie sighed. Not because she disagreed, because she hated watching our children hurt, even when the hurt was self-inflicted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly asked the question I knew was coming. "How far are you taking this?" I looked at her. "Until they understand." A week later, both kids were calling constantly. The conversations changed. The confidence disappeared. The entitlement became frustration. Then confusion. Then anxiety. And through it all, I kept giving them the same answer. "I'm cutting back." The exact advice they'd given me. Funny how different a sentence sounds when you're the one living with its consequences. If you've ever had someone criticize a sacrifice they never even noticed you were making, subscribe. Because some lessons can only be learned when the safety net disappears. By mid-August, something interesting happened. A rumor reached them. I never told anyone, but families are terrible at keeping secrets. Someone heard from someone who heard from someone else that I'd met with an attorney. The rumor grew quickly. By the time it reached Jake and Chloe, it had become something much larger. "Dad is restructuring his estate. Dad is putting everything into a trust. Dad is locking up the money." Suddenly, their schedules opened up. Jake started calling just to check in. Chloe began dropping by unexpectedly. Coffee appeared. Favorite desserts appeared. Concern appeared. It would have been touching if it hadn't been so obvious. One Sunday afternoon, Chloe showed up with a bakery pie I'd mentioned liking exactly once. Jake brought my favorite coffee beans. The same children who hadn't visited much before were now remarkably interested in spending time with Dad. I accepted every gift, thanked them warmly, and said absolutely nothing about the trust, nothing about the payments, nothing about the money. I simply watched. Watched them try, watched them worry. Watched them realize that maybe the future they'd assumed was guaranteed wasn't as certain as they thought. A few days later, Maggie found me in my office. I was reviewing documents, pages and pages of financial records. Every payment, every transfer, every expense, every sacrifice. 22 years worth. She stood in the doorway quietly. "What are you doing?" I turned the monitor slightly. Her eyes widened. The spreadsheet seemed endless. Rows, columns, dates, numbers, thousands of entries. "What is all this?" I leaned back in my chair. "The truth." She stepped closer, and then she saw the total. The color drained from her face. "George." I nodded. "Yeah." Neither of us spoke for several seconds, because suddenly all those years had a number attached to them. A very large number, a number neither of us had ever calculated before. Maggie's eyes slowly lifted to mine. "What are you going to do?" I closed the folder. Something I should have done years ago. The following Saturday, I picked up my phone, called Jake, then Chloe. "Come to dinner tomorrow." Neither asked why. They both already knew, because deep down, they understood this was no longer about a BMW. The car had only exposed the problem. The real conversation was still waiting. And after 22 years of quietly paying for everyone else's life, I was finally ready to have it. Sunday arrived right on time. So did Jake and Chloe. We had dinner first, Maggie insisted. The conversation stayed light. Work, weather, traffic, anything except the subject everyone knew was waiting. When the plates were cleared, I walked to my office and returned with a thick folder. I placed it on the coffee table. Neither of them looked comfortable anymore. "What's that?" Jake asked. I opened the folder and slid the first page toward them. "Take a look." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Jake started turning pages. His expression changed with everyone. Confusion, disbelief, shock. Beside him, Chloe had gone completely silent. The folder contained 22 years of records. Every phone bill, every insurance payment, every tuition balance, every rent supplement, every car expense, every dollar I'd quietly spent making their lives easier. Finally, Jake reached the last page. His eyes locked on the total. "Dad." His voice barely worked. "This says $1.2 million. I nodded. "That's about right." The room went still. Not angry still. Not awkward still. The kind of silence that happens when people finally see something they've spent years overlooking. I leaned forward. "You came into my house because of one car." Nobody answered. "I bought myself one thing after 40 years of putting everyone else first." Chloe lowered her head. Tears were already forming. If you've ever sacrificed for people who only noticed what you stopped giving, subscribe, please, because some lessons take a lifetime to learn. I slid a second document across the table. "My estate has been placed into a trust." Jake stared at it. "There are conditions now." The color drained from his face. No more automatic safety nets. No more monthly support. No more depending on me to solve every problem. For the first time all afternoon, neither argued, because deep down they knew I wasn't punishing them. I was finally teaching them what independence costs. A few moments later, Chloe quietly whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry." Jake looked down at the paperwork, then at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Understanding. Maybe even regret. That evening, after they left, Maggie sat beside me on the porch. The BMW gleamed in the driveway. I smiled and looked at it. 40 years of sacrifice, one reward for myself, and finally no guilt attached to it at all.